In Wolfsburg, Germany, there is a factory that once employed 60,000 people. 15,000 of those people will be gone, not fired, made redundant. The distinction matters to the accountants. It does not matter to the workers. Nobody is calling this a crisis. That is the problem. Germany is not burning. It is draining quietly, officially within normal parameters. German industrial production is down 15% from its all-time peak, not in a recession, not in a war, in what the government has officially described as normal operating conditions. 9 years and it has not recovered. That is not a cycle. That is a new permanent flaw. And the uncomfortable truth is that Germany's political class has not yet said that out loud. Japan forgot to have children. We covered that story. Germany forgot something different. Germany forgot what it was actually selling to the world. And by the time it remembered, the world had already moved on. This is that story. For 3 decades, Germany's industrial machine ran on 3 things: cheap Russian gas for energy-intensive manufacturing, open Chinese markets for capital goods exports, and the world's undisputed best automobiles. Remove any one of them and the model survives. Remove all 3 simultaneously. The model does not. 700 billion euros. That is what Germany has spent on its Energiewende, its attempt to replace Russian gas with renewables, since 2000. The attempt is not complete. German industrial electricity prices are still roughly double those in the United States. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 ended the arrangement that had powered German chemistry, steel and glass for 2 generations. The pipeline closed. The bills arrived immediately. The replacement has not arrived yet. The Südlink transmission line, the cable that was supposed to connect northern wind power to southern German industry, will not be complete until 2028. 2 more years of paying the wrong price for power, while competitors in the United States and China pay the right one. Then China stopped buying. Not all at once. Gradually. German capital goods, German machinery, German industrial equipment. China makes its own now, often cheaper, and the bilateral trade surplus that once defined the relationship has evaporated. German export sales fell for 5 consecutive months into 2026. That is not a dip. That is a structural shift appearing in data before the government admits it, in language, and then the cars. This is the part nobody in Germany wanted to say out loud for a decade. The world was moving to electric vehicles. Germany moved too slowly. China was not waiting for permission. Volkswagen is cutting 35,000 jobs. Bosch 22,000, ThyssenKrupp 11,000. These are not the same company. They are entirely separate decisions, arriving at the same arithmetic at the same time. Every story has a number that tells you how serious it is before the politicians say it. Germany's number appeared in January 2026. 3 million unemployed in Germany as of January 2026. A 12-year high for a country that spent the 2010s boasting sub 5% unemployment. This number represents something that does not reverse easily. In a worker's canteen in a Lower Saxony automotive plant, the lunch tables are half empty. The facility once ran 3 shifts. It runs 1 now. Nobody announced the change. The canteen just stopped being full. That is what structural decline looks like at ground level. Subscribe only if you want the version of events the financial press covers 6 months after we do. New documentary every week. This story is still moving while you are watching this. For 16 years, Germany ran a constitutional debt brake, the Schuldenbremse, no structural deficit above 0.35% of GDP, enshrined in the constitution in 2009. A source of national pride that became an increasingly expensive delusion. While it saved, bridges crumbled. Rail punctuality became among the worst in Western Europe. Digital infrastructure fell behind Romania's. The country that saved everything spent nothing on the things that were failing. In March 2025, they broke the brake, a constitutional amendment. 500 billion euros. Defense spending exempted from borrowing limits entirely. Infrastructure funded over 12 years, 1 vote, 1 threshold crossed after 16 years of refusal. This is the personal revelation I kept coming back to while building this video. I expected to find a country in managed decline making rational adjustments. What the data showed was a country that had been saving for decades and had to spend on infrastructure that should have been built in 2005. Germany's fiscal deficit is expected to widen to roughly 4% of GDP by 2027. The country that spent 16 years boasting about restraint is now borrowing at the pace it once publicly refused to consider. The irony is that it had to. Here is what the €500 billion fund does not do. It does not make German industrial electricity cheaper. It does not reverse 9 years of declining manufacturing output. It does not restore Chinese demand that has structurally shifted to domestic suppliers and is not coming back. The infrastructure fund builds roads. It does not build industries. And Germany does not yet have an obvious replacement sector for the industries it is losing at scale. That gap cannot be spent across in one budget cycle. A survey by the Institute of the German Economy found 40% of German industrial companies planned further layoffs in 2026. Not restructuring, layoffs. Two different words, both point in the same direction. The United Kingdom in the 1980s is the closest historical comparison, a manufacturing economy forced to deindustrialize faster than its service sector could compensate. Britain took a decade of pain before financial services filled the gap. Germany does not yet have its version of that gap filler. It has not found it. Here is the moment I step back from the data and deliver the verdict without qualification. Germany did not make a mistake. It made a series of rational choices that made perfect sense in a world that no longer exists. They mistook a model for a permanent condition. The cheap gas was not permanent. The Chinese demand was not permanent. The combustion engine was not permanent. 3 assumptions, all wrong. At exactly the same time, Germany did not run out of money. It ran out of the world it had designed itself for. In March 2026, the Strait of Hormuz closed. Germany imports roughly 70% of its energy. Chemical manufacturers imposed surcharges of up to 30% overnight. The second energy shock in 4 years arrived. While the adjustment from the first one was still incomplete, we covered the Hormuz fertilizer crisis in the last World Facture documentary. Germany is where that story lands hardest in Europe. Every month the strait stays substantially blocked adds roughly half a percentage point to Germany's energy cost disadvantage against the United States, the competitor that exports energy rather than imports it. The European Commission forecast 1.2% growth for Germany in 2026. That number was produced before Hormuz materialized. The German government's own estimate after the shock is 0.5%. A deal changes the ceiling. It does not change what the second shock already cost. The ECB has explicitly warned that a prolonged Hormuz conflict could push Germany into recession by end 2026. 4 recessions in 4 years, no post-war precedent, not one. Is that the story of managed decline, or something that has already left management behind? Here is the arithmetic wall. You cannot unspend 16 years of deferred infrastructure investment. You cannot re-import gas that was cut off. You cannot rebuild market share with a country that built its own alternatives and no longer needs what you are selling. You can spend €500 billion. You cannot buy back time. And in an industrial economy, time is what determines whether the skills, the supply chains, and the export relationships survive the transition or disappear permanently. Manufacturing is 25% of German gross value added, twice the share of France or the United Kingdom. When that sector contracts, Germany cannot absorb the blow the way a services economy can. There is no cushion, only arithmetic. Germany is the Eurozone's locomotive. Its stagnation suppresses growth across the continent, weakens the euro, constrains the ECB's ability to set policy that works for 20 countries simultaneously. When the locomotive slows, every connected train slows with it. In 2025, Germany's economy grew 0.2%, technically not a recession, a pulse. But a pulse is not health. It is the minimum evidence that something is still functioning. Germany's 2026 number before Hormuz was forecast at 1.2%, after Hormuz at 0.5%. The locomotive is running on fumes. That is not a metaphor. That is the energy data, the industrial output data, the unemployment data, the export data, the unemployment data. They all say the same thing. They have been saying it for 9 years. How long can the country ignore 9 years of data pointing in the same direction before the direction becomes the destination? Go back to Wolfsburg. The plant is still running. Cars are still coming off the line. 15,000 workers are still employed there. Down from 60,000, the plant did not close. It became a smaller version of what it was, operating at reduced intensity, producing less, employing fewer, not failing, diminishing, quietly, officially within normal parameters. That is what Germany's collapse actually looks like from the outside. Japan taught us that a country can disappear quietly while everyone is watching something else. We covered that. Germany is teaching the same lesson with a different organ. Not the birth rate, the factory floor. The fracture was already there in the energy dependency contracts signed in the 1990s. In the EV transition, Germany chose not to lead in the 2010s. In the infrastructure budgets that were submitted and not passed, nobody wanted to look. Now they have to. Germany spent 16 years protecting fiscal discipline while its factories aged, and its infrastructure crumbled and its competitors pulled ahead. Was that discipline, or was it the most expensive kind of negligence a rich country can afford to practice?